you. Inshallah, the reward will be for them as well. And hopefully it'll impress them in a way that will allow them to continue along the path of the deen. Okay, so that's the first issue concerning children. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then places an additional condition in this ayah, مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ السَّبِيلَ. Alright? That you need to have the ability to be able to go. So the ulama basically explicate this by saying that the means, the ability to go, is actually defined by having wealth, which is beyond necessity, such that you can afford two things. Number one, you can afford the trip in its entirety. And number two, you can afford to leave money behind for any dependents that are under your care. Alright, so the ability to go is defined by, number one, the fact that you have, or basically by the fact that you have wealth, such that you have extra wealth to spend for the trip, to complete the trip, and at the same time that you can leave behind a surplus for the people who are under your care. So for example, if you have two parents and you're taking care of them, you need to be able to have money to leave behind for the parents to be taken care of. If you have a family and if you plan on going for Hajj by yourself, you need to be able to leave behind enough wealth for the family to be able to sustain themselves while you're gone. Okay, so there's some discussions that the ulama raised concerning this. I think in this day and age, I shouldn't say in this day and age, but in this particular location in this day and age, really, when most individuals happen to be able to have this amount of wealth sometime during their life. So it's not a very complicated discussion, and I don't want to go into too many technicalities concerning it, given the audience that I'm speaking before. But some things that you do need to recognize as far as affordability are concerned. All right, so what do we mean by affordability? So there are some things that are not included that should be very clear in your mind. Number one, affording the trip does not mean that you can also afford the souvenirs that you want to purchase on the trip, right? So for example, an individual says, I want to go for Hajj, but if I go for Hajj, I have to bring back 25 janamazes, one for each of my family members. I have to bring back tasbihs. I have to bring back, a gold bracelet for this person. So I can't go for Hajj. I need to save up an extra few $1,000s so I can bring back gifts. That is not an excuse to delay the Hajj, right? What's meant by affording the trip is that you go and that you can come back, and it doesn't include this whole issue of needing to buy all these souvenirs. So that's the first point. The second point is that it does not include the cost of a luxury package. So you can't say that, look, I need $8,000 because if I'm going to do the Hajj, I'm going to do it right. I need the couches, I need the mattresses, I need my favorite hotel, etc. Then and only then am I going to go for the Hajj. You only get to do it once, so let's do it good, right? That's not the way you're going to think about it. Once you have the means to go, right, and you can find a package that's affordable, then the Hajj becomes mandatory on you, all right? So that's the second caveat. The third, and which is a really interesting discussion that the ulama raised, is that it does not include the cost of going to Medina. Now obviously you know that one of the greatest acts associated with the Hajj, but not necessarily part of the Hajj, there's only really three mandatory things in the Hajj. We'll come to this when we get to the fiqh. You need to be in ihram, you need to go to Arafah, and you need to do tawaf al-ziyarah, which is the tawaf that you do after you're in Arafah. So basically, these are the three mandatory things for the Hajj, all right? If you can find a package, all right, that allows you to fulfill these three mandatory things, and you can afford that package, that puts you under the category category of those people upon whom Hajj is mandatory. So it does not include the cost of going to Medina. Now, if you have the funds and you can actually go to Medina Munawwara, then that's great. But it does not include the cost when you're deciding whether you're somebody who needs to go for Hajj as soon as possible. Now, once those conditions are fulfilled, right, and there's some more discussion about these conditions, and we'll come to them when we cover Hajj Badal. But once these conditions are fulfilled, then it becomes necessary for you to go for the Hajj as soon as possible. That's very important that you understand this, as soon as possible. All right? This is based on the fact that the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that's narrated by Ibn Abbas radiyallahu an, in the book of Imam Abu Dawud rahmatullah alayh, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man arad al-Hajj falyata'ajjal." that the person who intends the Hajj, he should be quick about it. He should hasten towards it. So, based on this hadith, and based on the fact that the ayah is making a definite command upon a group of people, the ulama agree that once you find the means to go for Hajj, it becomes mandatory or necessary. Let's say the word necessary. It becomes necessary for you to go as soon as possible. Now this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that whoever intends to go for Hajj, he should hasten, actually teaches us many important realities. What's very interesting about the Hajj, and you'll see this also as we go through this series of lectures, is that the Hajj teaches you much more than just about this individual act of worship called the Hajj. There's a lot of preparation that goes into the Hajj, and it really prepares you to fix up your life the way it should have been. You'll see this as we move along. And also, the narrations concerning the Hajj and the rites of the Hajj themselves teach you many important lessons about life in general. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ advises us that the person who intends for Hajj, meaning that really the person upon whom Hajj becomes mandatory, should hasten towards it, really what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us is that there are certain realities of life that any believer should understand when they're concerning an act of worship, or when they're considering an act of worship. So, what are those? Well, number one, circumstances change. Circumstances, they change. Right now you may have wealth, right? Today you may have wealth, but that wealth may not remain. There are no guarantees that your wealth will remain. Today you may have it, tomorrow you may not. So when you have wealth in hand, it becomes necessary for you to be quick about using it in those things that it needs to be used for, before it slips from your hand. Because wealth is liquid, right? It's a liquid asset. It tends to flow. It doesn't necessarily stay in one person's hand forever. The person who has wealth one day can become poor the next day. So when you have that wealth, you need to take advantage of it and do what should be done with it. So therefore, if you are an individual that possesses the wealth to go for Hajj, do it quickly because you don't know what your circumstance will be tomorrow. The other thing that it highlights is that health may not remain. Today we feel healthy, and today we assume, especially being young, that we'll have energy and we'll be able to do what we need to do for the rest of our lives. You know, in your minds, you think about it, it's unimaginable that any sickness could come upon you, especially for the young people in the audience. You don't even think about the possibility that when I'm 40 or 50, I may have diabetes. When I'm 55 or 60, I may have high blood pressure, right? I may end up getting congestive heart failure. I may end up getting chest pain when I walk half a block. But if you look at people who are 50 and 60, most people have some disease or some disorder. So they were all young at one point. And each of them had the same thought, that I'll be young forever, and I'll have energy forever, and I'll always be able to do that which I desire. But the reality of life is that health does not remain. This body is made to actually break down. So when health is in our hands today, and the ability to go with a healthy, strong, energetic body to fulfill an act of worship for the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَلْيَتَعَجَّلْ. We should be quick about it, right? We should hurry about it. He should be quick about applying himself to that act of worship. And this is a really unfortunate reality about Hajj, because many individuals, especially the elderly, think that concerning their children, they have their whole life. Why do you have to go for Hajj right now? You're just in college. You don't need to go. This is a time for you to study, and then you can go later. That's a thought that's very prevalent, but actually no, this is the time to go. Based on the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, based on the ruling of the ulama, and based on the wisdom of just understanding the realities of life. Right? These are realities of life. Now the other thing that hits you that the ulama raise under this discussion is that, okay, health might remain, and wealth might remain, but who knows whether the desire will remain. And that's actually a really scary point. You know, the reality of life is that we desire many things. But the heart is an organ that constantly skips. The heart is an organ that constantly skips. I'll tell you, just look through your own lives. I've mentioned this several times. When you were 10, the most important thing was A. When you were 12, the most important thing was B. When you were 15, the most important thing was C. And without it, you couldn't live, you couldn't go to school the next day. That's the way human beings are created. You know, they tend to jump from desire to desire, right? When you're 12, you have to be in that